Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to FinStep Asia Fintech Decoded and Token Bytes. We are here with a returning guest, Daniel Levy, who heads Money 2020 APAC and Middle East. And we're going to be talking about trends in payments in APAC and also getting a sneak peek preview into Money 2020 Asia in Bangkok happening later this month. Danny, welcome back. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you for having me back on the show. I think this is the first podcast I've been invited back to. So I
We
obviously did a
like you
good
so
job on
much. We
yours,
made
but
you
yeah,
welcome back again. Yeah.
yeah.
You had a good response last time as well. And
Excellent.
and I always think, one of the underrated elements of running events and thought leadership is that you actually gain a lot of understanding of trends. You speak to thought leaders, industry leaders, the real decision makers. So you actually have a very good insight on what's happening, what is working, and what the future focus is on, right? And I think it's just a great way for us to highlight the same for our audience.
Yeah, I think I've almost 2 decades now working kind of in B2B events. I think a short stint in randomly kind of chem bio consulting early in my career. But yeah, I think one of the real benefits of this industry, and then obviously recently with Money 2020 over the last kind of 4 years or so, is that you just have such exposure to right people at the cutting edge of the industries that you're serving, really working in the trenches and doing the kind of impactful things day in, day out. So it gives you a fantastic overview, as you've said, into what's currently happening, and you get this kind of like very wide, view on the specific industry that you're serving. So it's quite a privileged position, really, working within the kind of B2B event space.
That's great. And we can then dive straight into looking at some insights from the APAC payments world. I also want to
Absolutely.
get some insights later on. Maybe we'll just talk a little bit about the event and what we can expect for this year's edition. But
Hmm.
starting off, right, Money 2020, 2026 for Asia centers on moving from infrastructure to impact, right? Because there's been a lot of
Hmm.
conversations around building different payment infrastructure, and now we got to see what the impact is of that infrastructure. In your view, what does success look like when fintechs are moving from building very impressive tech stacks to now actually delivering measurable outcomes across very diverse Asian markets, especially when we are seeing underserved communities in the emerging markets as also SMEs. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so as you know, I think last year when I was on, I also talked about kind of our research that we do. So each year after the event runs,
Mhm.
we don't put our feet up. In May and June after the event, we kind of get straight down to business of kind of speaking to fintech leaders, banks, regulators across APAC, and really trying to get to the core and to the bones of what's going on in the region. One, so we've got like a really well researched, well thought out program, and that aligns with our content themes. And two, so that we can publish a state of the industry research report that goes out normally a few months before the Money 2020 show in Bangkok. And actually, one of the kind of clearest themes in the latest report that was just published is all about how the industry is moving from building technology to providing kind of more real world impact, as you touched on.
Mhm.
Um, because I think what we're seeing, now really is that access isn't really the problem anymore. So I guess what I mean by that is that in many markets, and it shows in the report, I think over 70% of financial services acquisition is already digital. Um,
Okay.
but I guess despite that, um, Southeast Asia still has a kind of $300 billion SME financing gap. So what we're kind of being able to kind of conclude from the research is that something's not connecting. So I think that's where the focus really is now around impact that we're talking about. So I guess things like how are we actually improving access to credit? How are we helping SMEs grow? Are we improving financial resilience? And I guess some of the best examples of these would be like Ant Group, DBS. They're kind of showing what happens when you combine data, distribution, and infrastructure properly. Um, but I guess kind of too much of the industry's, still stuck in pilots. So, what we're really seeing from the report around impact is that if it doesn't translate into measurable economic outcomes, it doesn't really matter. So I think that's really what everything centers around in the report, and also, at Money 2020 Asia in Bangkok in a few weeks' time on April 21 to 23.
And what are the biggest gaps, if there were, that you are seeing? You want to name a couple of them that the report throws out, or from your experience speaking to these industry leaders?
You mean around impact
Yeah,
itself?
correct. Yeah.
Um, so I guess, the big one's obviously been around kind of AI, right? The last few years. So there's been a lot of talk, hasn't there, about the capabilities of AI.
Sure.
But actually, like, what does that mean for companies themselves? How is that actually being put into practice? Because I would say, a lot of banks in the region, for example, I've had pilots or maybe starting to look at how they integrate it. But when you get down to the kind of nuts and bolts of it, it's still a lot across kind of sales and collection. Actually, what are the kind of wider, bigger implications in terms of how it's going to make an impact, as I mentioned, into the kind of day-to-day of people's lives, or maybe in some of these underserved communities across Asia. So that would be a good example as well. So I think it's more like in countries, like the Philippines or in Malaysia, right, where there's SMEs and there's micro SMEs. Um, and actually for them, it's around their access to funding, being able to get onboarded and use digital wallets that can really change the trajectory of their business. So, these are the kind of examples that we're seeing actually around the kind of how is it lifting people out of their current situation and offering opportunities that wouldn't have otherwise been available. I think that's what we really mean when we say impact. So, it's less, I guess, talking about what it is and actually really looking at what it does. And that's where I think in Asia and Money 2020 Asia in a few weeks, we really only want to have, impactful case studies being presented or being discussed, because I think that's what people want to see, right? They want to see clear-cut examples. They want to see that roadmap, kind of warts and all, right? What's worked, what hasn't worked, and how can they avoid maybe making some of those same mistakes, or unlocking faster. So that's what we really mean when we say impact, because I think we don't just want to talk for talk's sake. We want to actually showcase innovation and where the region is really moving forward and actually starting to take the lead, right? I think Asia is now leading in so many different areas when it comes to fintech and cross-border payments and innovation. So really, that's what impact is all about for us.
Danny, when you look at this, it's a very good point you make. Payments has been very fundamental to anything fintech, and South Asia and Southeast Asia have been leaders when it comes to real-time payments, interconnected payments in terms of different markets. Nexus is something that is uh, growing and maturing in Southeast Asia with interoperable systems using QR codes. How do you see this evolution reshaping economic ecosystems? You mentioned about economic impact, but economic ecosystems are also heavily impacted by QR code and real-time payments, especially when we're looking at cross-border commerce and reduction of friction for smaller players.
Yeah, so I think you're right. I mean, Asia, I think, is setting the pace globally now in this area. I mean, one good example is clearly India, right, where UPI is doing over 10 billion transactions every single month. So that when that amount of transactions is being done, it's not really innovation anymore, right? It's more core infrastructure. And I guess what came through strongly in the Money 2020 research report is that payments aren't just a utility. So really, they're becoming, I guess I would say, more of a kind of foundation for broader economic activity. So the real shift, is cross-border. So systems like PayNow in Singapore, PromptPay in Thailand, UPI in India. When we think about these payments methods, the kind of friction of payments, which is always something that is talked about, right? About how you kind of remove that friction for customers. I mean, within these areas, right, friction is removed completely, right? It happens in a nanosecond, right? You whip out your phone, you click a QR, right? If you're in Singapore, like I am on PayNow, and immediately somebody is paid, a merchant is paid, you've transferred money. So, really what we're seeing is that payments are being settled instantly, costs are clearly dropping significantly. And we mentioned before, didn't we, around SMEs, and SMEs still make up kind of the backbone of the region. They can operate now regionally. And I think that's really the key point. So I think it's not really just about convenience. I would say it's more, the way I think about it, it's more about kind of enabling regional commerce at scale. And the Money 2020 report really just backs this up. So interoperability is becoming one of the biggest drivers of growth as we would see it across APAC.
And building on that, what we are seeing, I guess, in Southeast Asia in particular, is embedded finance, right? Borrowing from the Ant International WeChat Pay ecosystems. Now you have, with Grab, with Gcash, and all the others, including some of the Eastern Asian players like Line and others, looking to embed the finance into their super apps. And this is going mainstream. And we're talking about no longer tens of millions of users. We're talking about hundreds of millions of users per app, and in some cases, over a billion when it comes to the larger mainland Chinese apps as well. So what are the lessons that you feel that can be learned from the APAC experience for global players? We've had Elon Musk talking about how he wants X to become that super app, and there have been a couple of others who've tried doing something similar, but not really as successfully as what we've seen in APAC. What do you think are the key lessons why it succeeded in APAC, and what other markets, especially in the West, can learn from?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I would say this is something Asia clearly got right early, and again comes through very clearly in the report. So people don't really want financial services. I would say they want kind of outcomes, right? Deliverables. So I would say in the region, you've got platforms like Grab, Gcash, I think you mentioned, Alipay, WeChat Pay, just to name a few. And I guess in the region, right, their scale is pretty huge, right? I mean, I was in China recently, and everything is in WeChat, right? Everybody knows this, but again, I'm always just amazed every time I go and spend time on the mainland, how much operates inside that ecosystem. You can't do anything there, right? I guess without WeChat or Alipay, it's all in there. As a foreigner, you can't pay using your card anywhere, right? You've got to have those apps. And I'd say that's why I guess finance is kind of so embedded in Asia. It's at that kind of critical moment of need. It's not kind of sold separately, right? And I think if there's a stat behind it, like banks like DBS have shown, I think it was that digital customers are 2 to 3 times more valuable, purely because of the engagement and frequency, the kind of customer lifetime value. And another insight from our report is that distribution and partnerships are really now the primary driver of growth. So I would say, the takeaway for me is that distribution beats product, and ecosystems beat standalone services. And the nuance is like localization, right? So, those examples I mentioned, they're all localized, right? In terms of the markets that they share. You can't hope to kind of succeed across the region, right? If you've only got kind of one approach to market. So the nuance is definitely localization, and that's a major theme at Money 2020 Asia in April. And a major theme that came out of the report as well, right? So you've got to build for behavior, basically, not just for scale, and I think that is really crucial.
And just agreeing on that, one of the key things is with the digital payments, digital finance, you are collecting a lot more data of customer interactions, right, and customer behavior and transactions, of course, with consent, hopefully. And then you then have a lot more you can start offering versus offline, where you don't have as much lead points, as it were, into the payment world. And yeah, so then you have more products. And agreeing on your, product beats in a lot of cases design, etc. WeChat is a classical example. In the 10, actually, 12 years that I've been using it, I haven't really seen a major design upgrade or change. And but it's super functional. It's except for maybe the addition of mini apps that they brought in, but everything else has remained the same. And people are used to it. It's not the most fancy UX, UI, and you're not raving about it, but it is great for what you need to be done, and it's embedded in your life, literally.
Yeah. I mean, and sometimes companies that get that wrong, right? They kind of obsess over the shiny new thing, don't they? And sometimes all the updates or the product innovations, actually what made customers, actually enjoy using that service or that app actually then changes or erodes over time. So I think it's important to not drift too far away from your core, right? And still make sure that actually why customers want to engage and use your services doesn't change over time. You've clearly got to innovate, but don't forget about those core services.
Yeah, and building on that, with all this data that banks have over the last few years, we've seen a tremendous growth of use of artificial intelligence in a variety of different services. The more mature was on the RegTech, SoupTech side of things, with fraud detection, on the personalization, particularly for elements of shopping, etc. Now, what we're seeing is we're moving towards this agentic commerce conversation. And also from the report that you've been alluding to, and with conversations on Money 2020, how are you anticipating artificial intelligence to redefine collaboration between the banks, between fintechs and platforms? Because you're seeing this mix that's happening now, right? Like, as an example, with OpenAI now saying, okay, agentic commerce is going to be a major piece of their offerings going forward, and others are also looking at how you can drive that. So how do you see this collaboration between banks, fintechs, and platforms, some licensed, some being white label, or some being a key add-on to your services?
Yeah. I completely agree with your assessment as well, right? I mean, it's probably the biggest shift happening at the moment right now. Comes through loud and clear in the report as well. So I think what we're seeing is AI is moving from experimentation now to kind of that scaled deployment across the industry. There was a lot of talk, wasn't there, a few years ago about what it could do, and now I guess we're kind of seeing what it can do and how it's changing in this move to agentic. I think we're kind of moving from, I guess, efficiency, which fraud, chatbots, and what we're moving to is more kind of decision making and execution. So yeah, I think that what we're seeing, I would say, is that I guess we're entering more of a world, what people call, like, to your point, right, agentic commerce, agentic finance, where payments are triggered automatically. Things like credit models can be updated in real time. And I guess financial services basically becoming more proactive, right, rather than reactive. And one thing for me in the report that was interesting that it highlighted is that AI is accelerating collaboration, not competition. So I guess banks, you see that banks are building the trust, bringing the trust, and they're bringing balance sheets and regulation. You've got the fintechs bringing the speed and the UX, and the AI then kind of as that layer that connects and scales both. So, really with AI, we're kind of seeing that the model is shifting from competition to kind of more, I guess I would say, kind of orchestration. And the winners, I guess, will be the ones that can kind of deploy AI into the real world workflows and not just talk about it. So I think that's really what we were kind of seeing coming out of all the research that we've done from across the region.
And that would probably tie into the embedded finance conversation, right, with the right guardrails and regulations around it as well.
Absolutely, yeah. So quite similar as well. And again, just that collaboration piece, right? I mean, nobody's an island.
Yeah.
Being able to partner and have those right go-to markets, and making sure that you're serving the customers in the best possible way, then right, removing the friction with all that embedded finance.
And just building on that, we have history in investment services or in asset management, as it were, which goes back to 40 plus years. In
Hmm.
the 80s, when millennial capital started using AI for investment decisions and for trading, right? And what we saw was there was a lot of period where AI was being used in the investment banking and trading world for efficiencies, fraud detection, market conduct, etc. But the real push and value came when these hedge funds and asset managers started using it for investment decisions, which is then bringing in alpha and beta and growing that business as it were. So I guess that's where we're now seeing the broader commerce and finance conversation going.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had Salesforce on my podcast actually not too long ago, and we were talking about uh, agentic commerce and AI. And I thought he had an interesting point where he talked about, electricity when it first came on the scene, right? And,
Mhm.
you know, nobody could have imagined that electricity these days would be being used to kind of power, artificial intelligence and, smartphones and laptops and devices. So he kind of likened I guess the advent of AI almost to like that coming of electricity, where we're really just at that very, very early starting point, and actually where AI goes and develops to in the coming kind of decades and beyond, we can't imagine at the moment, right? And I guess this agentic workforce is just the cusp.
Well, hopefully it can't replace us. I mean, it can maybe with the podcast and stuff, but
We'll never replace people as special as us.
creativity can.
Yeah, yeah. Absolutely. But yeah, I thought kind of a very, very interesting thought process. And he also said that we're probably the last generation that will manage an all-human workforce.
Fair. Or
Mm.
probably already are, right? We're already talking
Yeah,
about
yeah.
using AI tools for Gen Z and beyond. So
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. So yeah, I guess our ways of working will change, right? I mean, people talk about it freeing us up and being able to focus on more strategic things, which will be exciting. But I guess yeah, more for maybe the next generation or our kids, right? Like they're going to be entering a very different world of work, I would imagine, in the next 10 to 20 years.
Yeah, I guess that's the only thing we all are agreeing on is that the world is going to be very different in that 10 years time
Very
to
different. Yeah.
where we are now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Change
one
is
of the
good.
things, and one of the things that I completely agree, and one of the most influential books that I've read or been asked to read was "Who Moved My Cheese," which is all about
Okay.
change and the constant of change and how you move yourself. But coming back, one of the
Mm.
conversations we're having in the agentic commerce world is how stable coins, digital assets are going to be the ones powering this agentic AI commerce. But broadly speaking, what we've seen over the last year and a half to 2 years since
Hmm.
that red letter day when BlackRock said that Bitcoin is digital gold with Larry Fink, and then continuing onwards with the regulatory updates in the US and closer to home here in Hong Kong, in Singapore, as also some of in UAE, we are now seeing this move where large, very large financial institutions are active in both the digital assets world with the
Hmm.
crypto side of things, but also looking at tokenization. Larry Fink recently said he wants to tokenize everything that BlackRock essentially operates or owns and offers, which is $12 trillion plus of financial assets. And with the regulations in place, do you believe we are now at an inflection point where it's no longer a question of POCs like we were talking about with payments at the start of this podcast, but moving from experiment to core infrastructure for things such as treasury, for settlements, for wealth inclusion, as the digital assets founders in the US have spoken about. Brian Armstrong spoke about this as well. or do you think there's still a lot of volatility and hurdles for public adoption? And you can break it down in terms of retail and institutional if you'd like to.
Yeah, it's a big question.
Let's break it down maybe. So let's look at it from an institutional perspective, then come to the retail world. Maybe.
Yeah. I mean, I think we just need to be probably precise, right, about where we are in the cycle. I think you were touching at it there. I think, this came out in the report as well. So I guess what we're seeing is that digital assets in APAC, you were saying that we are saying it's moving from speculation to more kind of core infrastructure to infrastructure. There's a few examples I would look at. So in Singapore, you've got the MAS's Project Guardian. Hong Kong, where you are, I mean, you'll know much better than me, but very progressive. A lot of tokenization initiatives, right? Really pushing forward there in Hong Kong, looking to be a hub for kind of Web3, stablecoin, digital assets. One thing Japan does really well is has a lot of regulatory clarity in this area, and so we're seeing use cases. So tokenized funds and bonds, more efficient settlement, stable coins being used for cross-border. So kind of, I guess an example would be the stable coins can reduce settlement times from days to minutes. That's a meaningful shift. But clearly, we're not at mass adoption, right? There's still quite a way to go. And the report, it highlights 3 key barriers. So one is regulatory fragmentation, 2 is trust, and 3 is looking at kind of integration into existing systems. So, the way I would think about it is like, the infrastructure is still being built, and adoption will start with institutions, right? And then we'll expand over time. But what I would say is, there is momentum, right? And there's clear use cases. So, this is becoming, part of infrastructure. And, like we're seeing at Money 2020, right, with our intersection zone, which is that kind of collision, right, between the kind of more old world order, that traditional finance, and more decentralized finance. It's now around these partnerships, right, and how the two come together to work together to move this forward. So it's a really exciting time. I'm sure you'd agree.
I totally agree. And I guess there's that distinction that we're seeing on, as you rightly mentioned, that public adoption, as it were, of crypto. It's still largely an investment asset for many. And what we are seeing is the momentum with embedded stable coins in remittance, in payments. And probably my view is that most will not directly interact with stablecoins. It will be services that are offered using fiat to stablecoin rails, and then that goes under the hood, as it were. So people are just paying, as it were, but enjoying the benefits and advantages of elements of stablecoin. Whereas the tokenization piece, I guess it's still going to be institutional led for the next 3 to 5 years before you start seeing broader, retail impact and influence, as it were.
Yeah, agree.
Now, we can't close a conversation on payments and AI and digital assets without the big Q being quantum, right? 2 years ago, or even a year ago, most would assume that quantum was far away, and it wasn't it was something to be aware of, but not necessarily something that you needed to start acting upon. But what we've seen, along with the likes of Emerging Payments Association, done a bunch of roundtables around this with IBM and KPMG, while we have also seen here in Hong Kong, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority looking at quantum readiness of financial institutions, that with this acceleration in AI, right, one of the underappreciated elements is that there's so much more compute now, even for quantum, because similar infrastructure that you're talking about and investment, some of it going into quantum. So cybersecurity is a major challenge, hassle, problem, call it what you will, across the world, not just in APAC. And when quantum comes in, there is then question of, are these large institutions, virtual assets, all of these, how safe are they? And so with more interconnected ecosystems, what do you feel the financial industry will balance? Innovation and security is very important, but how do you balance these two given the quantum, I don't want to call it threat, but impending quantum impact, let's put it that way.
Yeah, I think it was interesting because when we did the report in 2020 for the 2025 show, kind of cybersecurity, fraud, anti-money laundering, quantum kind of threats and risk, it was only at kind of single digits, high single digits, but in terms of a priority for companies in the region. And when we did it this year, it was in the kind of 90% range.
Yeah.
So just in 12 months, right, you can see the difference, right? I guess maybe less quantum, because I think, majority of people in the region, rightly or wrongly, still see that as further down the line, right, in terms of that kind of quantum breakthrough and obviously the threats it has to current encryption. The kind of more near kind of term is clearly that kind of AI, right? So, the benefits of AI, there's many, and then obviously there's the risk of AI. You've got kind of AI-driven fraud increasing. There's more APIs and integrations, more real-time systems. So, I guess the old model, which was build fast, secure later, I guess what we're seeing, and it came out in the report, is that it doesn't really work anymore. So, from the conversation we've had, is everyone's kind of thinking of more around kind of security having to be built from day one. And I guess what we're seeing now is more around things like zero trust architectures, continuous authentication, AI being used defensively, clearly, right, as well. And so I think there's a mind shift kind of going on at the moment. I think before, security was probably more seen as compliance rather than a core part of the product. And I think now that is shifting, right? Because I think in financial services, the one thing that is absolutely crucial, right, is trust. If you haven't got trust, then you're not going to be around for very long. So I think that's why we're just seeing this big shift at the moment. And for us at Money 2020 as well, right? If I look at the Asia show, it's up there probably with our kind of intersection, digital assets, stablecoin space. It's our fastest growing area, right? If you think fraud and KYC solutions, anti-money laundering, as I mentioned. So it's a really fast growing category for us. And I just think, if you're not constantly staying up to date, right? Because the fraudsters are probably having their own events, right? Where they're talking about how they can bypass all of these new, nice, secure systems. So it's got to be something that, people in your organization are waking up every day thinking about, going to bed thinking about, right? And, even me personally, I think I'm quite savvy. I almost fell victim to a fraud last year on WhatsApp. So there's a partner we work with in China. I got a WhatsApp from his account. It sounded exactly like him, the way he would talk, the way he would type. We had a long back and forth. And then just dropped into the conversation was like, he needed to get some money to a friend in Singapore. Could I transfer it over? I thought that's a bit unusual. And I almost contemplated sending it, and then kind of picked it with my wife, and she said, sounds a bit weird. Why don't you leave it for a half an hour, 45 minutes? And I think I had to put one of my daughters to bed. So I put it to bed, came back, called him on WeChat, because I was thinking about it going, and no, that's not me. So, I think they got on it through a kind of, what's the thing, the thing you use in China when we need to go on the Western systems? VPN, sorry, yes, I forgot the word for a sec. So on a VPN, and they'd got hold of his identity through that, and managed to get hold of his WhatsApp. But I thought WhatsApp was very secure, so it kind of threw me that someone could be on there impersonating someone you would know so well.
Yeah, and it is happening. I've seen a few WhatsApp impersonations of people's account get taken over, especially with WhatsApp on desktop. Plus the other conversation that I was seeing online, which I think is a best practice for all of us, is a safe word that you give to employees, your core employees, and your family, right? So when somebody calls or somebody is on a video, right? The idea is if you give a safe word, you ask them for it, and if they are actually your family, they will know it, right? And this is all
Yeah, yeah.
as employees, they'll have a sense of it. The other thing, which I don't know how true it is meant to be putting three fingers in front of your face.
Okay.
This is for you have these deep fake Zoom calls that people do,
Mm-hmm.
pretending to be from, calling you on Zoom to discuss to make sure it is you, right? But
Yeah,
you
yeah.
can also create your avatars, and so if you put the three fingers, apparently the AI is unable to then hide the face, and you can see
Interesting.
beyond the background. So that I mean, I haven't seen it yet, but maybe something to keep in mind.
It's very easy to steal someone's likeness these days, right? Apparently, you only need to hear their voice a little bit. You can imitate it, and then again, you can create a deep fake, can't you? If you've got imagery and
And
that kind of
and
thing.
like we're doing a podcast right now, and it's
Yeah,
public on YouTube, and we've done several speaking sessions where there are hours of footage and audio recordings of our
yeah,
voice and likeness, so not too challenging, especially for anybody who's online. Forget us, there's so many people now on TikTok, right, or the
yeah, yeah.
equivalents on Instagram, so everybody's kind of out there providing their
Mm,
prints, at least for imitation. Hopefully we see a brighter future for in the coming years. Closing on our
yeah.
overall conversation,
Hmm.
very, very insightful. I mean, the report's also been very insightful, learned a lot from it. If we had to pick three major trends you see for the next 3 to 5 years, where you
Yeah.
see, even Money 2020 APAC shaping the future events, what would those three be that you feel will impact the landscape? Shaping.
I can give you five if you want.
Go for it.
Uh,
More the merrier. Yeah.
which I guess it aligns kind of closely again with the report is so the five would be the first would be AI moving into production. I guess so we talked about it, right? So really
Right.
going from pilots to real deployment across lending, services and operations. Embedded finance really becoming invisible. So financial services basically are just part of everyday platforms. We're already starting to see that, right, in many different areas. Cross-border just becoming seamless. I think Asia would lead in that kind of interoperable payment system, as we already mentioned a few, right? Obviously, PromptPay in Thailand is a great example. Digital assets, integrating into the system. So especially a kind of across, I guess, settlement and liquidity. Um, and then the last one really would be around kind of inclusion, becoming commercial. So I guess this is probably a big one, but kind of Southeast Asia, especially fintech kind of unlocking entirely new customer segments. And I would say that that last point's probably quite important. So I guess inclusion is no longer just policy driven. It would be more seen as a growth opportunity.
Yeah.
And probably that's where a lot of the next wave of fintech value would come from. And that's not just theoretical. I think it's really what we're seeing across the region and all the research that we do and the customer interactions, building Money 2020 Asia each year, that. So I think that last decade, really, the last decade's been more around building fintech. And I think the next decade in Asia will be around kind of making it matter, that impact that we started the conversation on.
Very well said, and I look forward to following these five trends. In particular, the impact trend that you've rightly highlighted, and we're seeing that from the work we are doing as well. A lot of
Mm.
policymakers are moving from how do we create policies for generating impact to say, okay, what are the use cases we can see that are actually having an impact, and how can we fund that or get private parties to come into funding that as well. Closing up, give us a sneak peek into Money 2020 Bangkok later this month. What can we expect, and anything exciting that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, so I mean, not really a sneak peek now because a lot of it's already up on the website
Sure. Yeah.
with 3 weeks to go. But I mean, I guess things I'm the most excited about in terms of what's new for this year. It's our third edition in region, so I guess we're growing up now, right? We're
Yeah.
no longer the infant. We're probably coming to our kind of more adolescent years. And the show kind of continues to go from strength to strength. So we're already seeing, a lot more delegate registrations, a lot more sponsorship registrations. But apart from that, probably kind of three big new things on the show floor, if I had to pick, or maybe four. The first would be the intersection area we've touched on. So it's a brand new zone on the show floor, which is all around that convergence of traditional and decentralized finance. We've got a really, really cool stage, as I'm sure you can imagine, as Money 2020. So it celebrates old Asia and new Asia, and it kind
Nice.
of has that melting point in the middle coming together. I won't give too much away, but the speakers basically enter and exit through, kind of a very innovative stage to the right and left.
Pretty cool.
It's pretty cool. There's a dedicated zone, and then there's like, a really cool kind of liquidity cafe pop-up, food and beverage, which aligns with the space. There's some lounges in there. So, if you're interested in kind of that intersection of the two areas, it's a good place to hang out at the show.
Yeah.
Over 3 days, and there's a lot of very kind of again practical implementation case studies rather than what might happen. It's actually what is happening. The second thing I'm excited about is Policy 20. So it's a new co-located regulatory and policy summit that we've got running at Money 2020. And we've got 50 regional and global regulators speaking and attending at the show from Thailand, all across APAC and the rest of the world. So it's certainly one of the biggest gatherings at any fintech event globally for regulators and policymakers. So, kudos to the content team here because they've done an amazing job pulling that together. The third thing I'm excited about, one thing that's always hard to do at large scale events is kind of more interactive content, so facilitated networking.
Mm-hmm.
So we made a very concerted effort to bring that at Money 2020 last year. But what we did was we ran a lot of it upstairs on level 1 at the Queen Siriki in smaller breakouts. It was obvious that people loved that but wanted it on the show floor. So we've built a new stage called the Inner Forum stage.
Okay.
And it's a kind of fully immersive workshops, roundtables, interactive content, and it's got a very surprise twist, which I don't want to spoil, but
Okay. We look forward to this.
you'll get greeted on the door, you get taken in, and you get to send a message to your future self with digital artwork in frames on the walls. And the last thing I'm excited about, which is new, and obviously everything is very exciting, but the last thing that's completely new is we built a new startup and investor park or zone right at the middle of the show floor, and that's our fifth stage. So that's got content running over the 3 days from the kind of best startups in the region, investors, there's LP, kind of GP, VC meetups going on, startup meetups going on. And what we've also got is a pitch competition of over 20 startups, and the top 3 will get prize money of $70,000 and put onto a startup bootcamp kind of program with investor advice. So yeah, again, completely new for us in 2026. So I'll stop there because you otherwise you won't get me to stop talking. You have to kick me off. But I hope to see
what's coming. Yeah.
everyone there in a few weeks' time, right? 21st to 23rd April. It'll be our best event yet.
It looks exciting. Your show floor, your food floor, everything has always been very interesting. I mean, I'm a big fan of the butterfly blue pea tea. That's got introduced to it, funnily enough, at Money 2020 2 years ago. But the different concept and having run events myself, I can appreciate how difficult it is to keep reinventing, especially for a big brand which is global. How do you bring in newer things, which is localized yet innovative, and manage all of that? So kudos to you and to the team, and I look forward to that. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, we look forward to having you back, and hopefully we can raise your surprise and delight levels in 2026.
Looking forward to covering it. Danny, once again, thank you so much for coming in and joining our podcast. And to the audience, keep an eye out for more news on Money 2020 as we share on our newsletter and our podcast. So Danny, once again, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. See you soon.
See ya.